The Hale family Thanksgiving had always looked like a postcard to anyone on the outside. Warm lights glowing through frosted windows, polished silverware, and the smell of spiced cider drifting from the kitchen. But on this particular night, Maren Hale sat at the long mahogany table with the faint sense that something invisible had already cracked the room in half. Leora, her younger sister, rose to her feet with a bright, theatrical grin and tapped her wineglass as if accepting a national award. The conversations around them quieted instantly. "Mom and Dad are signing the house over to me," she announced, lifting her chin with the glow of someone receiving a crown. "Maren gets nothing." And just like that, the room exploded. A few relatives cheered. Someone whistled. Another yelled, "About time." Maren didn't clap. She didn't blink. She only smiled, thin, controlled, the same smile she wore whenever a storm rolled in and everyone else panicked, while she remained the only one who knew the roof belonged to the wind, not to the people beneath it. She set her fork down with deliberate calm, leaned slightly forward toward her father, Ronan, and said softly, "Should I tell them or will you?" The color drained from his face. Leora froze mid-smile, fingers trembling around the stem of her glass. The room shifted, relatives leaning in, sensing an undiscovered fracture widening under their feet. Alma Whitlow, the family matriarch, exhaled slowly, as if she had waited years for anyone, to call an end to the pretending. In the heavy silence, Maren reached for the strap of her bag, her movements measured, steady, preparing to reveal the truth that none of them, not even Leora, were ready to hear. Before the silence shattered, before she exposed the truth that had been living like a quiet knife beneath the dining table, Maren looked across the room and wondered, who else here had ever lived through families like hers? Families that didn't break loudly but splintered in slow, hidden ways. She had grown up in the quiet spaces where affection wasn't withheld exactly, but never offered unless it served a purpose. Leora had never known that space. She had always been the favored one, our spark, Cassandra called her, a natural. The child who danced through praise, who twirled in new dresses bought with money their parents magically found whenever Leora needed lessons, camps, and opportunities. Maren remembered being told those same things were too expensive when she asked. She remembered moving to Chicago after college to build her life on her own terms, only to be accused of abandoning her family for choosing independence. "You're always thinking about yourself," Cassandra had said once, as though self-preservation were selfishness. Meanwhile, Leora stayed close, slipping perfectly into the golden mold their parents carved. Maren didn't envy her. She just learned early that she'd have to build her own scaffolding because no one would hand her a ladder. The only person who ever truly saw her was Alma, her grandmother, a sharp-eyed, silver-haired woman who squeezed Maren's cheeks and whispered, "You're stronger than they give you credit for." That whisper had carried her through more years than anyone knew. And now, on this suffocating Thanksgiving night, as Leora waited for applause and Cassandra wiped a tear of pride, Maren knew the family's illusion was about to collapse. Because they weren't giving Leora a gift. They were giving her a debt so deep it could bury her. And Maren wouldn't let them pretend otherwise. The memory of how all this began flashed through Maren's mind like a warning she should have heeded sooner. 6 months earlier, on a humid June afternoon, Cassandra had called her out of nowhere asking her to come home, for something important. No context, no explanation. When Maren arrived, she was ushered directly to the dining table, the same table where tonight's chaos now unfolded. Ronan sat at the head with a manila folder neatly arranged before him, like he was preparing for a business pitch. Cassandra stood behind him, smiling too wide, a brittle, stretched expression that never boded well. "Sweetheart," Ronan began, sliding the folder toward her, "we're refinancing the house. Just a routine signature. Better rates. It's nothing you need to worry about." Maren had learned long ago that when her parents said not to worry, it meant the opposite. She flipped through the pages slowly. Too many documents. Too many blacked-out numbers. Too many missing explanations. "Can I take these with me?" she asked calmly. "My lawyer can look them over." The way Cassandra's smile twitched and Ronan snapped the folder shut too quickly told her everything. "It's just a formality," he insisted. Why complicate things? But Maren had already stood, folder under her arm. She drove back to Chicago in silence, an uneasy pulse in her chest. The next morning, her lawyer called with a voice stripped of softness. This isn't a refinance. It's a liability transfer. If you sign, you assume their debt. Debt? Maren whispered. What debt? Then came the truth. A second mortgage, missed payments, foreclosure warnings. Secrets stacked in layers. That day, something in Maren hardened. Not out of anger but clarity. Her parents weren't just struggling. They were drowning. And they expected her to drown with them. 2 months after the lawyer's call, just as the shock was beginning to settle into anger, Ronan phoned again, but this time his voice cracked around the edges. He didn't ask for a loan. He didn't ask for help. He asked for money. Your mother's medical bills, he said, the words tumbling too quickly. We're behind. We just need a little to get through the month. But when Maren offered to pay the hospital directly, the story broke apart like wet paper. His excuses folded in on themselves, and the truth spilled out. Late payments, extended deadlines, desperation woven into every sentence. That was when Maren finally understood the scale of their collapse. They were not looking for support. They were looking for a lifeline. And they expected her to tie it around herself. By November, the secret sat between them like a ticking bomb no one wanted to acknowledge. Conversations narrowed into weather updates and awkward silences. No one mentioned the papers. No one mentioned the lie about medical bills. And still, her parents did not know that Maren had pulled the property records herself, that she knew about the second mortgage, the interest devouring their equity, the foreclosure clock counting down. Then Leora began posting hints online. Photos on the porch, captions about big changes coming, jokes about being ready to step into her new home. Each post tightened the knot in Maren's stomach. A week before Thanksgiving, Cassandra called. Her voice unbearably cheerful. Leora is so excited to host once things settle with the house, she said lightly, as if the house were a harmless heirloom. That night, Maren stopped waiting for honesty. She gathered every overdue notice, every document, and every summary page into a single folder, proof she would carry like a shield. Because if her family insisted on turning Thanksgiving into a performance, she would no longer be the quiet extra. On Thanksgiving morning, Maren drove home with the folder tucked beside her in the passenger seat like an unwanted passenger. The closer she got to the Hale family home, the heavier the air felt. Cassandra opened the door with a tight hug and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You look beautiful, she said. Leora will be so happy you're here. The way she emphasized Leora, not we, told Maren everything. Inside, the dining room gleamed. Extra leaves in the table. Glasses polished to a shine. Every chair filled, except the one beside Maren's, which wasn't pushed aside or moved. It was simply gone. Alma Whitlow watched her from across the room, giving her a tiny nod, the kind that said she knew far more than she let on. Conversations dipped every time Maren passed, flattening for a beat before rising again with forced laughter. Leora floated through the room like a star on parade, checking the angles of the centerpiece, smoothing imaginary dust from her sequined dress, whispering into Cassandra's ear. Her smiles toward Maren were polite, distant, the smiles you give a coworker you barely tolerate. It hadn't always been like this. They once shared a childhood full of whispered secrets under blankets, hair braiding, stolen sweaters, and late-night drives. But somewhere between adolescence and adulthood, Leora had stepped fully into her golden girl destiny, and Maren had slipped quietly out of frame. When Leora finally tapped her glass that night, wearing the necklace Alma had passed down, Maren knew the performance was beginning. Everyone leaned in. Everyone braced for joy. But Maren's hand brushed the edge of her bag, feeling the papers inside. The truth sat there waiting, heavy, sharp, undeniable. She didn't plan to humiliate them. She planned to stop pretending. And when Leora announced the house transfer, Maren realized the time had come. When Leora announced the house transfer, her voice bright as crystal, the room erupting with cheers, Maren remained completely still. It wasn't shock holding her in place. It was certainty. She had expected this moment from the second she walked through the door and saw the strange tension floating around the house like smoke. Leora stood tall, basking in applause, her eyes glittering with triumph. Cassandra dabbed the corner of her eyes as though witnessing some milestone. Ronan attempted a proud smile but kept glancing at Maren, like he knew the performance had cracks no one else could see. Maren let the applause die before she spoke. "Dad," she said softly, but her voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Should I tell them or will you?" Utter silence fell. Fork dropped. Ronan swallowed so hard his throat clicked. Leora's smile froze into something brittle. "Tell them what?" she demanded. Around them, relatives leaned forward, excitement shifting into unease. Alma straightened in her chair, her pale eyes fixed on Ronan. Maren didn't answer immediately. She simply reached into her bag and placed the thick folder on the table, its edges worn from weeks of handling. Ronan's face drained. Cassandra grasped his arm. Chairs creaked as people shifted. "Before everyone celebrates," Maren said, "you should know the condition of the house you're gifting." Leora laughed nervously. "The condition? It's fine. Dad said everything was in order." "Did he?" Maren tilted her head. "Or did he avoid mentioning the debt?" Gasps rippled through the room. Cassandra's hand slipped from the table edge. Ronan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Maren rested her hand on the folder, thumb stroking its corner. "I'll explain," she said quietly. "Since no one else will." Maren flipped open the folder with the slow, deliberate calm of someone defusing a bomb. The first page, a notice stamped in red, gleamed under the chandelier light. She slid it forward. "This," she said, "is the first overdue notice. They're behind on payments for the primary mortgage." The room held its breath. Leora blinked. "Behind how much?" Maren lifted the next page. "Enough that the bank has issued multiple warnings." Cassandra whispered. "Maren, stop," but her voice trembled. "Why?" Maren asked. "You weren't embarrassed when you tried to trick me into signing the refinance forms." A sharp, collective inhale spread across the table. Ronan rubbed his forehead, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Alma's lips pressed into a thin line of disappointment. "Trick you?" Leora asked, her voice sharpening. "You're blowing this out of proportion." Maren slid the next page across the table. A summary sheet. "There's a second mortgage," she said. "Taken out without telling anyone." Leora's face paled. "A second what?" "They're behind on that too." Maren tapped the bold red total. "You're looking at over $100,000 in debt." A hush fell so deep the ticking radiator sounded like a heartbeat. "No," Leora said firmly. "No, they would have told me." She turned to Cassandra and Ronan, her voice cracking. "Wouldn't you?" Neither parent answered. Cassandra's shoulders curled inward. Ronan stared at the table. Leora looked back at Maren, her expression shattering. "They said the house was a gift," she whispered. "It was never a gift," Maren replied. "It was an escape route. First they tried to put it on me. When that didn't work, they turned to you." Leora reeled back like she'd been physically struck. The room's warmth evaporated, replaced with a cold dread that seeped into every corner. Cason Boyd, Leora's fiancé, had been quiet until now, sitting stiffly at her side like someone trapped in a scene he suddenly didn't understand. But when the words "second mortgage" and over $100,000 hit him, he leaned away from Leora as though distance might protect him from the fallout. "Is she lying?" he asked, voice low but shaking. Cassandra's tears welled. Ronan's jaw twitched. Neither answered. And silence, in this moment, was as good as confession. "Cason, please," Leora whispered, reaching for his arm. He pulled back. "You told me the house was paid off. You said we'd have a clean start." Leora shook her head desperately. "I didn't know, I swear I didn't know. They told me." "They told you what?" Cason snapped. "That everything was perfect while they hid a financial crater." Leora's breath hitched. Kaysen's face hardened. You expect me to start a life on a sinking ship? He stood abruptly. The room jerked with emotion. Cassandra gasped. Ronan muttered something unintelligible. Alma closed her eyes, as though witnessing a tragedy she had predicted long ago. Kaysen, please don't go, Leora choked out, reaching again, but he stepped back, avoiding her touch. I'm not marrying into this, he said, not cruelly, but with the finality of a door slamming. Without waiting for anyone to speak, Kaysen walked out of the dining room, past the turkey, past the stunned family, and out the front door. The door shut behind him with a sound that echoed like a broken vow. Leora's legs buckled. She fell into her chair, shaking violently. Tears smeared the mascara she'd applied so carefully. For the first time that night, she didn't look like the golden daughter. She looked like someone watching her world collapse in real time. Leora stared at the table, her breath coming in tiny, fractured gasps. She looked so small, hunched beneath the weight of humiliation and betrayal. Not Marin's betrayal, but the one inflicted by the very parents who had raised her. This isn't my fault, she whispered, her voice thin and childlike. I didn't know. Marin softened just slightly. I know, she said quietly. I never blamed you. I blamed the people who put you in this position. Ronan suddenly slammed his palm against the table, making glasses rattle. You ruined everything, he thundered at Marin. She didn't flinch. No, she said calmly. You ruined everything the day you tried to hand your debt to your daughters as if it were an inheritance. Cassandra sobbed harder. You're tearing this family apart. It was already broken, Marin replied. I'm just refusing to keep sweeping the pieces under the rug. A ripple of uneasy agreement shook the room. Relatives exchanged looks, some shocked, some angry, some quietly acknowledging truths they had long suspected. Alma Whitlow stood slowly, pressing her palm to the table for support. Despite her age, her voice carried sharp and steady. I taught you better than this, she said, staring directly at Ronan. Your daughters are not lifeboats for you to climb into. Ronan's mouth fell open, stunned. Cassandra looked away in shame. Leora lifted her eyes to Marin, searching, hurting. What do I do now? She asked, voice trembling. Marin inhaled slowly, the weight of years pressing behind her ribs. Before she could answer, a loud, unexpected knock shook the front door. Everyone froze. The knock sounded again, firm, authoritative. Ronan frowned, confused. Cassandra wiped her eyes. Leora stiffened. And Marin simply waited. She knew exactly what this was. Ronan opened the door with the caution of a man who already knew he wouldn't like what stood on the other side. A woman stepped inside. Plain suit, badge clipped to her belt, expression calm but unreadable. Mr. and Mrs. Hale? She asked, scanning the stunned faces behind him. I need to speak with you regarding your mortgage records. Cassandra swayed as if she might faint. Ronan's skin turned chalk white. Few relatives gasped. Leora gripped the table so tightly her knuckles blanched. Marin didn't move. She simply folded her hands in her lap and breathed evenly. Ronan's voice cracked. Why is she here? The investigator stepped further inside, her tone professional and unshaken. We received a report of potential financial misconduct. I have a few questions. Her gaze took in the scattered documents, the pale faces, and the vibrating tension. Cassandra stumbled forward. This is a misunderstanding, she said weakly. Please, Marin, tell her. Tell her you misunderstood. Marin met her mother's desperate eyes with a steadiness that surprised the entire room. I didn't misunderstand anything, she said. Not the first time. Not the second. The investigator opened her folder. Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale, when was the last payment made on your primary mortgage? Silence. And the second mortgage? More silence. The relatives who had earlier clapped for Leora now shifted away from Ronan and Cassandra, their expressions tight with judgment. Alma stared at her son with disappointment so deep it seemed to age the room. Ronan stammered. We were going to fix it. But you didn't, the investigator replied. And decisions were made that may have violated lending agreements. Cassandra covered her face. Leora whispered, "Oh my God." Marin simply sat there, the storm finally breaking around her instead of on top of her for once in her life. The investigator's questions unfolded one by one, each landing with the weight of a hammer. Every time Ronan hesitated, every time Cassandra wiped her trembling hands across her face without answering, the room shrank a little more. What had started as a celebratory dinner now felt like the inside of a courtroom, one where every guest had suddenly become a witness. Leora sat motionless, staring ahead with a dazed expression, mascara streaks drying on her cheeks. Her breathing came in quick, shallow bursts, as though she were struggling to keep up with the unraveling of the life she thought she had. Alma remained behind her, one hand resting lightly on Leora's shoulder. It was the only gesture of comfort in a room full of fractures. "Mr. Hale," the investigator continued, "records show you refinanced 2 years ago. Can you explain the purpose of the second loan?" Ronan swallowed. His voice came out rough, barely audible. "We needed it to stay afloat." "And did you disclose the outstanding debt to either of your daughters before attempting to transfer the property?" Cassandra shook her head violently. "We weren't trying to hurt them," she whispered. "We're their parents. We thought." "You thought they'd clean up after you," Alma said sharply, her voice cutting through Cassandra's excuse. Gasps rippled across the table. Cassandra's lips trembled as she tried to speak, but nothing formed. The investigator nodded and wrote something down. "We'll follow up formally. For now, I have the documents I need." She gathered the papers Marin had provided, flipping through them briefly before slipping them into her folder. "Thank you for your cooperation." The word cooperation hung in the air like a reminder of everything they hadn't willingly revealed. When the investigator walked out, closing the door with a soft but final click, no one moved. No one breathed deeply. The performance was over. All that remained was truth, and the rawness it left behind. Cassandra turned toward Marin the moment the door closed, a desperate plea already forming in her expression. "Please," she whispered, taking a shaky step forward. "Please tell us you didn't mean for this to go so far." Marin didn't back away. She wasn't angry now. She was tired, hollowed by years of quiet disappointment. "I didn't make any of this happen," she said gently. "I only refused to be part of the lie." Ronan stumbled toward the table, gripping the back of a chair as if he needed it to stay upright. "You embarrassed us," he hissed, voice trembling with shame. "In front of our whole family." "You embarrassed yourselves," Marin replied. "I didn't take out the loans. I didn't hide the debt. I didn't ask my daughters to carry consequences that weren't theirs." Leora let out a soft, broken sound, a sound that pulled everyone's attention back to her. She lifted her eyes, red and swollen. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked her parents. "Why did I have to find out like this?" Cassidy's face crumpled. "We were trying to protect you, sweetheart. By lying to me." Leora's voice cracked. "By setting me up to inherit a foreclosure." Ronan slammed his fist onto the table again, but this time it wasn't anger, it was despair. "I was going to fix it," he shouted. "I had a plan." "No," Alma said firmly. "You had a fantasy." Her eyes were sharp, steady, unyielding. "And you handed that fantasy to your daughters like it was their responsibility to make it real." Cassandra sobbed openly. Ronan covered his face. Leora stared at them both, the betrayal sinking deeper, the innocence stripped away. And Marin just stood there, her heart aching for a sister who had finally stepped into the truth neither of them asked for. As the stunned relatives began murmuring among themselves, the energy in the room shifted sharply. Moments earlier they had clapped for Leora, toasted her future, and cheered for the house she believed was hers. Now they avoided Cassandra's eyes, avoided Ronan's trembling hands, avoided the growing awareness that they had applauded a lie. Aunt Miriam was the first to speak. "Ronan," she said quietly, "how long has this been going on?" Ronan didn't answer. His silence seemed to swallow itself, tightening the room with shame. Uncle Darius shook his head. "You can't drag your children into this," he muttered. "This isn't how family works." Cassandra snapped, her voice high and strained. "We didn't have a choice." "Yes, you did," Marin said softly. All eyes turned to her. "You could have told the truth before things got this bad. You could have asked for help the right way. You could have warned Leora before promising her a house that wasn't yours to give." Leora winced, curling her fingers into her dress. "Kaysen is gone," she whispered. "He walked out on me because of this." Alma moved closer, placing a gentle hand on Leora's back. "Anyone who leaves at the first sign of hardship wasn't a partner," she said softly, but her eyes flicked toward Cassandra and Ronan with disappointment. But Leora shook her head. "No," she said. "He left because I lied. Because I believed something I shouldn't have believed. Because I trusted you." The words struck Cassandra like a blow. "Leora, please." "No," Leora said, voice trembling. "Don't call me sweetheart. Not right now." A heavy silence washed over the room, thick and unyielding. For once, Marin didn't feel invisible in her family's chaos. She felt painfully, sharply seen, not for causing destruction, but for refusing to carry it anymore. When the relatives finally began gathering their coats, the room took on the strange quiet of a theater after the final act. No one hurried. No one spoke loudly. They whispered polite goodbyes to Alma, avoided Cassandra and Ronan entirely, and cast long, unreadable glances at Marin and Leora. The weight of what they had witnessed clung to them as they slipped out into the cold November night. When the last door shut behind them, the house felt too large, too hollow, as though something fundamental had been scraped out of its walls. Cassandra sank into a chair, her eyes red, her hands trembling. Ronan paced with his hands on his hips, muttering words that didn't form sentences. Alma moved to Marin's side, giving her a soft nod of quiet pride. "You did the hard thing," she said. "Most people spend their whole lives avoiding it." Marin exhaled shakily. "It doesn't feel good." "Truth rarely does," Alma replied. "But it's still the truth." Leora stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. "Marin," she said in a small voice. Marin turned, bracing herself. "Yes. Can you stay? Just for a little?" Marin's chest tightened. It had been years since Leora asked for her, not because she was expected to, but because she genuinely needed her. Marin nodded. "Of course." Leora's eyes welled again, but this time the tears weren't angry. They were hollow, afraid. "I don't know what happens now," she whispered. Cassandra lifted her head, face streaked with tears. "We'll figure it out," she said shakily, as though saying the words could make them true. But Ronan shook his head, stopping in the middle of the room. "No," he muttered, voice cracking. "We won't. Not unless we finally admit how bad this really is." And for the first time all evening, Marin believed him. Later that night, after Alma had retired to her room and Cassandra had disappeared into the kitchen under the pretense of cleaning, Marin and Leora sat together on the living room couch, the same couch where they once fell asleep watching movies as kids. Neither spoke for a long time. The silence wasn't hostile now. It felt heavy, shared, as if they were both finally acknowledging a truth they had been avoiding for years. Leora stared at her hands. "I feel stupid," she said quietly. "I feel like I've been living in a story someone else wrote for me." Marin shook her head gently. "You trusted them. That's not stupidity. That's what children are supposed to do." Leora's lip quivered. "But you didn't trust them." "I learned the hard way," Marin said softly. "And I never wanted you to learn like that." Leora wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "Kaysen said he wanted honesty. He said he valued integrity. And then tonight," she swallowed hard. "Tonight he walked out without even asking for my side." Marin's heart softened. Then he was looking for perfection, not partnership. And perfection doesn't exist. Leora leaned into her, resting her head on Marin's shoulder the way she used to when nightmares woke her up at night. "Do you think we'll be okay?" she whispered. Marin placed a steady arm around her. "Yes," she said. "But not because of them. Because of us." In the kitchen, Cassandra listened from the doorway, her face crumpling at the realization that her daughters were finding comfort in each other, not in her. Ronan stood beside the darkened window, staring out into the yard like he was trying to understand where everything had gone wrong. And for the first time, the Hale family felt something honest. Not unity, not forgiveness, just the beginning of truth. The next morning arrived quieter than any Thanksgiving that house had ever seen. The air felt heavy, as though the walls themselves were grieving the illusion they once protected. Marin woke early, unable to sleep after the previous night's emotional storm. She found Alma already in the kitchen, steeping tea with steady hands. "Did you rest?" Alma asked without turning. Marin shook her head. "Not really." Alma poured 2 cups and slid one toward her. "None of us did," she murmured. "But rest will come. Truth always finds a way to settle." Before Marin could respond, she heard soft footsteps behind her. Leora entered the kitchen, wrapped in a blanket, her face puffy from crying. "Morning," she whispered. Alma pulled her into a gentle hug. Leora clung to her, shoulders trembling. When she pulled back, she looked at Marin timidly. "Can we talk later? After breakfast?" Marin nodded. "Whenever you're ready." Cassandra walked in moments later, looking as though she had aged a decade overnight. Her eyes darted between her daughters, guilt and exhaustion tangled in her expression. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "All of us." Ronan appeared behind her, rubbing his temples, his posture defeated. Marin studied them both. 2 people who had spent years constructing walls of pride and secrecy now standing like broken pillars in the ruins of their own making. "We'll talk," Marin said. "But not if it's more excuses." Cassandra sagged at the words, but she nodded. "No excuses," she whispered. "Just truth." Finally, the 4 of them sat at the kitchen table, the house around them stripped of pretense. And for the first time in years, Marin felt something she hadn't felt toward her parents in a long time, the faintest possibility that honesty might begin where denial finally died. Once they were seated, Ronan exhaled shakily and rested his hands flat on the table. "I should start," he said, though fear trembled beneath the surface. "I didn't want any of this. I didn't want to lie. I didn't want to drag you into our mess." Cassandra closed her eyes, tears already gathering. "But you did," Marin replied gently. "It wasn't an accident." Ronan nodded, shame softening his features. "I was drowning," he whispered. "The second mortgage, the payments. Every month felt like a wall closing in. I kept thinking if I could just make it to the next payday, the next month, something would break open." Cassandra reached for his arm. "We thought the refinance would save us." Marin looked between them, searching for understanding she wasn't sure she had. "Why not tell us before it became this?" Cassandra's voice cracked. "Because we didn't want you to see us fail. We're supposed to take care of you, not the other way around." Leora flinched at that. "Then why give the house to me?" she asked, voice trembling. "Why set me up like that?" Ronan dropped his gaze. "Because you were here. You were close. We thought you'd understand." "Understand what?" Leora asked, tears falling. "That you were drowning and decided to hand me the anchor?" Silence splintered across the room. Alma watched her son with a sorrow so deep it made Ronan look away. "Mistakes don't destroy families," Alma said softly. "Secrets do." Cassandra wiped her face. "We should have told you both. We waited too long." Marin leaned back, letting the confession breathe. "The truth hurts," she said. "But it's still better than lies." No one disagreed. They simply sat there, 3 generations finally facing the reality they'd all avoided for years. After the heavy confessions settled, Cassandra turned to Leora with an expression painfully fragile. "We shouldn't have promised you the house," she said. We shouldn't have let you believe it was something it wasn't. Leora's throat tightened. I built plans around it, she whispered. Kaysen and I talked about renovations, starting a family someday, everything. And now? Her voice broke. Maren reached across the table and took her hand, offering a grounding presence. None of that was your fault, she said. You believed what you were told. Ronan swallowed hard. Kaysen should not have walked out on you, he murmured. That man. Stop, Leora said quietly. He left because he saw a lie that I didn't see. If he couldn't stand beside me when everything fell apart, he wouldn't have stood beside me in real life either. Cassandra sobbed softly at her daughter's pain, but Leora didn't look at her. She only looked at Maren. Thank you, she whispered, for telling the truth, for stopping it before I signed anything. Maren squeezed her hand. I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it because you deserved the full picture. Alma nodded approvingly. You both did. Silence drifted over them again, but this time it wasn't suffocating. It was contemplative, almost cleansing. Then Leora whispered what none of them expected. I want to help you fix it. Cassandra snapped her head up. No, sweetheart, you shouldn't. Don't call me sweetheart, Leora interrupted gently. Not until we're honest with each other. Ronan inhaled sharply, humbled. Maren studied Leora, really studied her, and saw not the golden girl, not the protected daughter, but a woman ready to step into her own strength. For the first time in years, they weren't standing on opposite sides of anything. They were standing together. The rest of the morning was spent sorting through the mountain of paperwork Ronan had avoided for nearly 2 years. Overdue notices, foreclosure warnings, statements with balances that made Cassandra flinch every time her eyes crossed them. Maren organized everything into neat piles, her calm movements guiding the rhythm of the room. Leora sat beside her, reading through documents with a newfound determination, refusing to look away from any harsh detail. Alma supervised with quiet authority, pausing only to refill cups of tea or place a steadying hand on a trembling shoulder. We have options, Maren said eventually, highlighting sections of a document. They're not easy, but they exist. Cassandra leaned forward. What kind of options? Maren explained gently. Selling the house before foreclosure hits. Negotiating with the bank. Consolidating the debt properly instead of hiding from it. Ronan let out a long, shaky exhale. I should have asked for help sooner. Yes, Alma said bluntly. But you're asking now. So listen to your daughters. The words struck Ronan more deeply than any scolding. He nodded. Leora took another stack of papers. If we sell the house, she said, we might lose the place we grew up in. Cassandra reached for her. Homes aren't walls, she whispered. Homes are people. Leora's eyes softened, finally meeting her mother's gaze. Then let's be people worth rebuilding with. That was the first time Cassandra truly cried. Not guilty tears, not embarrassed tears, but tears of release. And for the first time, Ronan didn't try to hide behind excuses. He simply nodded, shoulders slumping as he whispered, Okay. We'll do it your way. The room shifted subtly. Not into forgiveness, at least not yet, but into something steadier, accountability. And with accountability came possibility. By noon, the entire family had gathered in the living room, stacks of paperwork spread out across the coffee table like evidence from a crime scene. Maren led them through a step-by-step breakdown of what needed to happen next. Contacting the bank, arranging an appraisal, preparing the house for listing. Leora took notes, nodding thoughtfully at every step. Cassandra listened intently, constantly brushing away tears, while Ronan spoke only when necessary, his voice stripped of bluster. Alma watched it all unfold with quiet pride, her gaze lingering on Maren. You've grown into a remarkable woman, she told her softly when the others stepped out to take a break. You stand firm, even when it costs you. Maren looked down, emotion swelling unexpectedly in her chest. I just wanted the truth, she said. For all of us. And you brought it, Alma replied. Don't ever doubt the worth of that. When the family returned, Leora approached Marin again. When we sell the house, she said, will you help me find a place for Mom and Dad? Something they can actually afford. Marin blinked surprised. Yes, she said slowly. Of course. Ronan rubbed the back of his neck. I don't deserve your help, he murmured. But thank you. Marin didn't say he was forgiven, not yet. She simply nodded. They had miles to go before trust could be rebuilt. But they were moving forward. Together. And that was something. As they continued sorting through documents, Cassandra whispered, I'm sorry, Marin. For everything. Marin looked at her mother carefully, searching for sincerity. He found it. I know, she said softly. We'll figure the rest out. And for the first time in years, Cassandra believed her. Over the next week, the Hale household transformed from a battleground into a workspace. Realtors came and went. Appraisers measured every corner. Boxes were filled with old photos, dusty decorations, memories tucked away for another season of life. Through it all, Marin remained the steady center, coordinating calls, setting up appointments, and guiding her parents through the unfamiliar territory of financial honesty. Leora stayed by her side every step, asking questions, taking notes, learning how to shoulder responsibility without carrying blame. The sisters, once separated by years of silent resentment, found themselves rebuilding something they had lost long ago. One afternoon, as they packed the last of the old books into boxes, Leora looked at Marin with a tenderness that startled them both. I'm sorry I didn't see you, she said. All those years you were drowning alone. I should have noticed. Marin paused, a book in her hands. It wasn't your job, she said gently. We both grew up in a house built on silence. We just learned to survive it in different ways. Leora nodded, tears in her eyes. Phil, I want to do better. You are, Marin said. And she meant it. Cassandra and Ronan worked quietly in other rooms, humbled, grateful, slowly shedding layers of denial. Alma drifted between them, offering guidance where needed, reminding everyone that rebuilding wasn't an overnight task. It was a process, a painful, necessary one. When the realtor confirmed their listing price, Cassandra gasped. It's really happening, she whispered. Ronan took her hand. It has to. And for once, Cassandra didn't argue. She simply nodded, trusting the process, trusting her daughters, trusting the truth that had nearly torn them apart but was now beginning to hold them steady. The house sold faster than anyone expected. The market was strong, and despite the financial chaos behind the scenes, the Hale home had charm. Sunlit windows, a spacious yard, the echoes of memories that lived in the walls. When the offer came in, Ronan stared at the number on the document for nearly a minute before speaking. This clears the debt, he whispered. Cassandra covered her mouth with trembling fingers. All of it. All of it, Marin confirmed. Relief rippled across the room like a sigh after years of held breath. Leora wiped her eyes. Then we can start over, she said. But Ronan shook his head. No, we can start again. Starting over means pretending the past didn't happen. He glanced toward Marin. And we can't pretend anymore. Marin was startled by the honesty in his tone. No, she said quietly. We can't. Alma clapped her hands softly. Good. Then maybe this family finally has a chance to become what it should have been. Cassandra stepped toward Marin, uncertain. Where do we go from here? Marin considered her mother for a long moment. The fear, the hope, the fragility. You find a small place, she said. Affordable. Manageable. And I'll help you get settled. Ronan whispered. You're too good to us. I'm not doing it for who you were, Marin replied. I'm doing it for who you can be now. The words settled between them like a bridge finally being built. And as the sun streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the boxes and empty spaces, the Hale family felt something unexpected. Not joy, not forgiveness, but possibility. Fragile, precious beginning. Moving day arrived with a cold wind and low winter clouds. The Hale home, once the stage for a dramatic unraveling, now stood half empty, echoing with footsteps and memories. Marin supervised the movers while Leora wrapped the last fragile items in newspaper. Cassandra wandered through the rooms in silence, touching doorframes as though saying goodbye to old versions of herself. Ronan stood by the truck, watching the boxes stack higher and higher, his expression solemn. When everything was packed, Marin did the final walkthrough. She paused in the dining room, the room where everything had changed. The long table was gone, the chairs removed, the walls bare. Only the memory remained. The applause, the announcement, the silence that followed when the truth cracked open. Leora stepped beside her. "Feels different now," she whispered. Marin nodded. Truth always changes a room. Leora leaned against the wall, hugging her arms. "Kaysen messaged me today." Marin raised an eyebrow. "What did he say?" "That he's sorry. That he acted out of fear. That he wants to talk." Marin studied her sister's face. "Do you want to talk to him?" Leora considered the question, then shook her head softly. "I want someone who doesn't run when things get hard." Marin smiled gently. "Then you already know your answer." Leora exhaled. "Yeah, I do." They locked the door together and walked down the steps, joining Cassandra and Ronan by the moving truck. Cassandra reached for both daughters' hands, her own trembling. "Thank you," she whispered, "for helping us, even after everything." Marin squeezed her mother's hand. "This is the first day of the next chapter," she said. And for once, Cassandra believed her. The new apartment Cassandra and Ronan chose was small but warm, a modest two-bedroom with sunlight pooling through the windows in wide, gentle streaks. It wasn't the sprawling house they once had, but it didn't carry the weight of secrets either. It was a place to breathe, to begin again. Marin and Leora helped them unpack, arranging furniture, setting up the kitchen, making the space feel lived in. Alma arrived with a pot of stew and a bag of linens, insisting that no new home begins without a proper meal. Ronan chuckled weakly at that, a small sound but genuine. Cassandra placed framed photos on the shelf, one of the whole family before everything cracked, one of the sisters as children, one of Alma on her 70th birthday. As Marin hung curtains, Cassandra approached her quietly. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness yet," she said. "But I'm going to earn it." Marin turned. Her mother's eyes were clear, steady, not desperate, not manipulative, but honest. "Forgiveness isn't a switch," Marin replied. "It's a road. And we're on it." Cassandra nodded, tears spilling over. "I'm glad you didn't give up on us." Marin softened. "I wanted to," she admitted. "A lot of times. But family shouldn't be held together by silence." Leora joined them, wrapping an arm around both women. "Then no more silence," she said. They stood there, 3 generations of wounds and hope intertwined. Alma, watching from the doorway, smiled. "Good," she said. "Now you're finally a family." And in the quiet glow of the new apartment, with boxes half unpacked and stew simmering on the stove, which finally felt true. Weeks later, on a calm evening in early winter, Marin sat in her Chicago apartment reflecting on everything that had happened. She had returned home when her parents needed her the least, but the truth needed her the most. She had walked into a performance and ended it with honesty. She had stood alone at a table full of people who claimed to love her, and finally spoke the words she'd swallowed for years. And in doing so, she'd given her sister a chance to break free from illusions, her parents a chance to confront their own mistakes, and herself a chance to step into the woman she had become. Strong, clear, unafraid of truth. Her phone buzzed. A message from Leora. "We're having dinner tonight. Mom made your favorite. Come if you can." Marin smiled, softly, genuinely. The fractures hadn't vanished, but the walls were gone. The rebuilding was real. She typed back. "I'll be there. Save me a seat." Outside, snow drifted past her window in slow, quiet spirals. Families, she realized, don't fall apart because of mistakes. They fall apart when no one is brave enough to name them. Marin had been brave. Leora had followed. Cassandra and Ronan were learning. And Alma, wise, patient Alma, had guided them all toward something truer than they'd ever known. Maren put on her coat and stepped into the cold evening, the city lights reflecting off the fresh snow. She wasn't walking into a perfect family. She wasn't walking into a healed one either. She was walking into a family finally ready to try. And that, she decided, was enough. As she locked her door behind her, she whispered into the quiet hallway. Truth isn't betrayal. Hiding it is. Then she walked forward, toward dinner, toward reconciliation, toward the next chapter waiting for her.